All right, folks, you still with us? We got one more panel and then a plenary address. Our final panel of the day is religion and media. And we are grateful to have with us three excellent speakers. Heidi Campbell is professor of communication and affiliate faculty in religious studies and a presidential impact fellow at Texas A&M University, where she is director of the Network for New Media, Religion, and Digital Culture Studies. She is, frankly, I think one of the foremost experts on religion and new media in the United States, and is the author of over 100 articles and books on that topic, including my personal favorite, Digital Creatives and the Rethinking of Religious Authority. Next to her, we have Benjamin Peters, the Hazel Rodgers Endowed Chair in Media Studies at the University of Tulsa. He holds a PhD from Columbia University and specializes in the relationships between emerging technology, culture, and society. He particularly focuses on comparative media studies, examining, in particular, Russia, Europe, and the United States. He is the author of How Not to Network a Nation, The Uneasy History of the Soviet Internet. And finally, we have Brooke Zaugg, the executive director for the Faith and Media Initiative, a nonprofit that connects and provides resources to a diverse global network of media members, content creators, faith organizations, and business leaders. It is dedicated to accurate, balanced representation of all faiths in news and entertainment. As before, each of these people will offer us a 10-minute or so discussion. Then we will have a conversation among us, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Heidi.
As they say in my neck of the world, howdy. It's good to be with you. I'm going to be talking to you, I've been studying the intersection between new media, religion, and digital culture for almost 30 years. And in that time, I've kind of developed some ideas and some kind of theoretical approaches to understanding the relationship between religion and media. So what I want to present to you today is kind of several ideas weaved together into an argument. We aren't going to be able to go into depth to some of the kind of ideas I present, but arguing that kind of the Mormon response to digital media and digital religion both kind of replicates things that have happened in the mass media age and tensions, as well as offers new opportunities. I study mostly Judaism, Islam, and Christianity more broadly, but through interactions over the years, I've had a chance to look at Mormon media, especially in the mass media era. And my personal first encounter with Mormon media was this PSA when I was about 9 or 10 years old. In the 1970s and 80s, there was a lot of kind of PSAs put forth by the church, and this was coming out of a series called Homefront, so a lot of PSAs aimed at kind of family. And this particular one stood out to me. It was we saw a little girl coming home from a birthday party, and she was excited to tell Mom, who was too busy in the kitchen cooking, and then Dad, who was fixing something, and then her sister, who was putting on makeup. And then she finally goes out to talk to the family dog, and he yelps at her and says, "Yes, I'll listen to you and tell you your story." And it was a great kind of encounter of just seeing a young person kind of looking for that connection in with family, and finally finding it was a family dog. And for me, as I thought back about this invitation, it really sums up the church's response to kind of using media, especially kind of in that era of mass media, electronic media. Now, over the course of my research, I've spent a lot of time kind of looking at the different ways different religious groups respond to media and how they make decisions about media. And initially, in my early days of my research, I thought I would find, okay, here's the Catholic approach to media and the Methodist approach and the Orthodox Jewish approach versus the Reformed Jewish approach. But after spending quite a lot of time, I realized that religious communities often have very similar patterns in how they respond to media. And especially this came out of some of my research on looking at the mass media age. And so both Ben and I are trained in what's called the social shaping of technology tradition, where we look at kind of how human users respond and adapt to technologies to their moral economy, we could say. And so in my book, When Religion Meets New Media in 2010, I offered this paradigm of that if you're going to study religious groups' response to media, you need to understand four things. So first is, what is the history and tradition of that community? So idea that the past, the journey that community has developed its view of media through its theology, through its previous decisions, like how it responded to the printing press, how it responded to the era of electronic media, filling into how it is responded to the internet. And then once we know a little bit of the backstory, if we kind of can highlight what are the dominant core values of that community. Especially related to the media choices that community has made. So obviously, many religious traditions have lots of values, but looking at what are those values that kind of would indicate the choices they're going to make, or maybe the decisions they'll make about their media consumption. And with that kind of background, that then presents an understanding about, okay, groups, community groups, their choices about media. Now, one of the key arguments that is often made about religious communities is that they're either they love media or they're anti-media. But, in the reality, and no religious community that I've ever studied, and I've studied, again, very conservative Amish groups, Orthodox Jewish groups, and even some kind of cults, but most religious groups, they make choices about what they're going to accept based on their values, what they're going to reject because of the uses maybe disrupt the community boundaries or kind of promote values that are problematic. And what's most interesting, I find, is the ways that religious communities reconfigure media and technologies in line with those values. And then, fourthly, I argue that we need to pay attention not just to what groups do with technology and media, but what they actually say about it. And I call this communal framing. And especially if you look at kind of recent, the last 20 years, about how different religious groups preach sermons on media, the internet, smart mobile media, even AI, we can begin to see kind of when they talk about how to use media or how they justify their use of media, it's often they're presenting a certain identity framework. So from this religious social shaping of technology, I want to kind of put forth a kind of a hypothesis about how the Mormon Church has dealt with kind of media in kind of the mass media age and then moving into this wonderful world of AI. So I briefly draw on the work of Gavin Feller's 2003 book, Eternity in the Ether, A Mormon Media History. If you don't want to read the whole book, in the Wayfarer magazine, Ben has done a great kind of summary and conversation of this book. But he highlights in his kind of telling a number of values, but I think three that are really important. He says one value that's kind of informed Mormon use of media is this kind of what he calls the vision of Zion. So using media to help implement a holy, utopian-based society in the world today in religious principles. So how do we use the media? It's based on kind of what the kind of vision of the world that we are called to live in and create, and using media to bring that about. Secondly, and you can see this kind of pointing back to the PSA, family values and family narratives are really important. So those that kind of both protect the family unit and affirm family identity, as well as the values that should be cultivated with the family. And the third kind of value that Gavin talks about is this idea of kind of the tension between control and compromise. So the idea that media give us these opportunities, but they also maybe come with some risk. And so how do we balance those promises and threats in light of both kind of protecting the values of the community, as well as kind of the church and its organizational structure and the leadership? Oh. So you can see kind of, if we kind of take those as kind of premises for kind of core media values, we can kind of see kind of that PSA as kind of really emulating at least that era of the mass media age, of really trying to, the church kind of highlighting values, using the media of the day as a way to create those messages. And these PSAs, they appeared at popular times. They came on when I was watching cartoons on a Saturday morning. They came on right before Little House on the Prairie on Thursday nights, which was my favorite show as a kid. And so we saw that kind of they're using official sources to kind of affirm the narrative and through the media. But I was asking both my nieces that are kind of just teenagers, and I asked my Gen Z students, I said, well, if you were going to talk about Mormonism media, what ideas or what comes to your mind when you think about Mormonism in media? And the first thing they said is, the secret lives of Mormon wives. And then a few of them named off a couple other kind of, media influencers. We know that kind of like Mormon women have been foundational in like basically mommy bloggers of the kind of 90s and 2000s. Mom Talk, the TikTok mommy influencer kind of craze was kind of started by several Mormon women. And I kind of think that this kind of says, like we've moved from the era of the PSAs where the church is telling the message of the church. The church is espousing the values of kind of the community, whereas we now have a new cohort of influencers. So it's kind of, we've switched to go from a top-down to a bottom-up. And so one of the kind of great fears of, in that age, and one of the big fears of the digital age has been is, that one, the internet is going to cause people to plug in and then log out of religion and log out of religious community. And the second thing is that kind of because the internet allows people to bypass hierarchies, it's going to give a space for kind of alternative and maybe challenging views. And again, we saw that kind of in one of the values of from Feller's book, talking about this idea that it's a compromise in using the media. But I want to argue that kind of in the age of digital religion, if you think of digital religion as a new era of media, but it is also kind of basically bringing us full circle to kind of creating a new space that where religious communities as well as religious individuals are able to thrive. So this term digital religion is kind of both a theoretical term and it's a area of study that I've helped develop. And so kind of three traits of digital religion is, one, it's about scholars like myself looking at how is religion being lived out through mediated and network negotiations. So the key thing is that religion, more and more, it's mediated, whether it's through the screen, whether it's through a smart app where we maybe kind of gathering with people to pray or doing religious study. And it's also networked. Our spiritual communities that we rely on, they're not just the people we see when we gather together as a community, they're also the people that we kind of network with through digital technologies. A second trait about digital religion is that traditional communities, their religious practices and structures are becoming more flexible and personalized in digital culture. So as things are getting imported online, and again, the great disruption of the pandemic basically forced a lot of religious groups to go online in ways and do mediated communication and religion in ways they hadn't before. So the traits of digital media, which encourage flexibility, connecting to multiple spaces, and also center around the person rather than the community, are definitely influencing kind of traditional religious groups and how the practices are portrayed online. The third characteristic of digital religion is that when we look at digital religion, oftentimes people think of it's just what's happening online. But increasingly, we live in a world where our technologies are embedded in our everyday life, and we're interconnected. Right now, during this conference, we had people here and we had people online. I'm recording my talk, on my phone, and it's being live transcribed through the wonders of AI. And so we're constantly in these mediated spaces. So more and more, digital religion is about seeing that online and offline are interconnected. Or I like the word that Luciano Floridi, who's a philosopher of information, he calls it on life. We're always on, and we're living our life, and just in multiple spaces. And we can have to do a lot of unique things to kind of keep those spaces coherent and connected. So if we think about, we're in this new era of digital religion, what are some of the challenges? Well, if we go back to that idea of kind of compromise and conflict, one of the traits I talk about is in how people live digital religion is this idea of shifting authority. So when the internet first came out, one of the big concerns was that it gave space for things like these influencers. First it was in email communities, then it was on blogs, now it's through social media platforms. So that authorities, new gatekeepers, new authorities are able to have a sphere of influence. They don't have to get training, they don't have to become an elder, they don't have to go through any kind of vetting process, they just create their digital space and they have authority. And so if you think about, like kind of the worst fears would be like, some of the debates happening right now about religious robots. Are we going to replace pastors and priests with kind of these digital figures? And there's experiments happening in Shinto temples in Japan where there's many people aren't joining the clergy, so they are using digital robots. There's places in Germany where they're kind of doing mediated services, and and you can can get a blessing from a prayer robot, in a German cathedral if you want to. So we can see that, there is a potential for people to use digital technologies to from undermine or to challenge traditional authority. But I want to posit that we should see shifting authority as a way that religious leaders, and the Mormon Church being a great example of this, of being very media savvy, understanding not just how to use media and produce media, but the impact of it. And by kind of joining in that and seeing AI as kind of a collaborator rather than a competitor, are being able to maybe bridge this gap. So this is, I don't know if any of you've seen the LDS bot online. It's not created by the church, but it's created by a foundation that basically is a supporter of the church, and they used some research money to create this bot. And so you can have a nice conversation. In fact, when I was preparing for the talk, I was kind of balancing some of the stuff, academic stuff I read, with kind of my little conversation with the LDS bot on its latest decisions about AI and whatnot. So if you want to have a conversation. But here's an example of, again, a religious individual, so not a person, member of the, not a leader in the church, but using the technology to build a resource to help enhance the community and open up kind of conversations about the faith in different ways. And so this leads into kind of where I'm ending up and going full circle. So, the LDS Church in 2024 came out at one of the annual gatherings with a set of guiding principles about the use of AI. And I felt like it was interesting that when if you look at these 4 values, in line with the values I just mentioned at the beginning from Gavin Feller, that you can see that, hey, we're in a new age, but we're still talking about the same values. We're still talking about the idea of spiritual connection, this idea of we're trying to kind of build in the world through media resources that kind of connect God and his children. We want to support those positive values of, honesty and integrity, and those kind of ideas that kind of should be the foundation of the family as well as the church. They're also kind of talking about, transparency. And so in an age where they can make the decision where, well, we're just going to have a top-down, make choices about AI and you're just going to have to live with it, the church has chosen to basically let people know when they're interacting with AI on their website. So they also are trying to now put citations on the website when, hey, this content or this image was created by AI. So kind of the idea of like, okay, we're going to engage with the culture, but we're also going to kind of be transparent about that. The church is also now working on issues about like safeguarding the sacred, about what information do they put into kind of GPTs and LLMs. How do we kind of be accountable for the kind of information that the church keeps private and public? And then a sense of basically they're trying to be very transparent, or at least that's what their plan is, to be transparent about these choices they make through kind of different meetings and giving reports and updates as they kind of try to figure out what's the best way to use AI for the work of the church, for communication, and for publicizing. So I kind of leave it there as a way to say that in an age of digital media and AI, the church and religious organizations are challenged by the new opportunities, but in many ways, they're doing the same thing they did with every era and generation of technology. What are our values? What have we done in the past? How can we use these in ways that enhance that? Maybe there's some things we're going to have to change and be willing to be more transparent in ways that we haven't been comfortable with or done before. But doing that in order to kind of gauge to the contemporary world rather than shy away from it. Thank you.
Set up my slide here. Sorry. Okay, let's try this again. This is harder than it looks, I promise. Okay, let's see if I can do this now. Okay, very good. We'll come back to these two in a second. It is a delight to be with you. Thank you so much, Heidi, for the lovely conversations. I'm very grateful for Matt, Dave, Rosie, and others who have made possible our gathering. I'm going to continue the conversations about what's the relationship between media and religion, but let's do something different. Let's put on our media philosophy and history hat, and I'll speak speculatively for a moment as a practicing LDS media theorist. So the Mormon movement, taking its nickname from a book, has long employed diverse media to disseminate its gospel and to perfect its saints. Rather than simply surveying Mormon history, as we might do, and I think at endless interesting length, I'm going to argue today that Mormonism is media. By understanding Mormonism as a product of media institutions, theology, and innovations, we can gain a clearer understanding of Mormonism, as well as see Mormonism as a lens to examine how modern religions navigate evolving media landscapes, in part by becoming those media landscapes, as I think Heidi is suggesting. A public religion is media, and there's no other option. So here's a thought about Mormon thought as media theory. So I define media as both the means of communication as well as the forces that shape our environments. So media function as transmission channels, that's the communication. They deliver content and they exert influence, but media are also functioning as environments. Here think the medium of the Petri dish, if you would, and how it shapes how users act, interpret, and make sense of the world. A newspaper thus transmits new information, while it also serves as a stage for repeating archetypal narratives, stories that shape public commentary. Sometimes a campus is a set of classrooms for delivering instruction. Sometimes a campus is the world. Early church leaders like Parley and Orson Pratt employed medium in the second or environmental sense, as did most individuals before 1900. Within early Mormon thought, the elemental meaning of medium as that which carries light, heat, magnetic force, and even truth imprints itself upon materialist Mormon theology. And now we see the obvious truth in how digital media, digital religion, as Heidi so put it, indeed, have shaped most of our waking moments and our sensory experiences of life. A smartphone, sure, it both sends and receives emails, but as an environment, it extends to the fact that all professionals, while traveling, are still obliged to maintain their email readiness, right? It changes our whole life, our social way of being. It's hard to imagine a public, never mind a public religion, off the electric grid or beyond the scope of cell phone data today. Indeed, there is no line between offline and online. We're all on life. I love that phrase. So Mormon thought, in many ways, already acknowledges this and anticipates it. It's long been a kind of media theory. Just as media theory, digital media theory today benefits from this earlier 1900s term of media as material environments. So my next comments I'm going to break out into three different parts, and I'm going to frame them in response to my friend's Nate Oman's forthcoming essay on the disposition of Mormonism. But I'm also going to, for fun, I'm going to give at the end of each of my three parts a little geometric model with reference to these two people. So the main purpose for this fun is so that I put these two portraits next to each other. I think most of you know who the person on the right is, the Prophet Joseph Smith. The person on the right, the person on the left, is also a man who created creative and profound world system views by rejecting assumptions, which he did also in 1830. His name is Nikolai Lobachevsky, and he's the founder of non-Euclidean geometry. So the creeds that he rejects is the fifth postulate of Euclid's parallel lines. So I'm going to give you a vision of, and this is Nate Oman's terms, a kind of conservative disposition, a progressive disposition, and then finally a liberal disposition using geometry as a way of thinking about, respectively, our church's relationship to media institutionally, that's conservative, our media theology, that's often progressive, and our media innovations, which is liberal. And I should be clear here, by liberal I don't mean like Democrat or Republican or something. I mean the space in which institutions and rights are negotiated, a kind of compromised public space in the liberal tradition dating back to Mill. All right, so first, institutions. So as a survivor and immigrant people, Mormons embraced institutional conservatism in more than media for a long time. Joseph Smith chose print and paperwork as the bedrock of temple and family history record keeping, a conservative media survival choice for a people without a nation, which I think is wise, even as at the same time that the Fox sisters, who were called spiritualist mediums in the Northeast, were imitating new media of the time, the telegraphic tapping, which they imitated in their seances. Or remember how, like Freud, would imagine the psychoanalyst as a receiver medium, using the new medium of the phonograph, recording all ellipses and slips of tongues with fidelity. Well, you can see the problem with new media in this case. If you don't know what a phonograph or a telegraph is, you've missed the headline. Not so Joseph. What do we get? Paperwork, in-person witnesses, handbooks, signatures. So the print conservatism of the correlated church has remained fairly consistent over 2 centuries, and it's been marked by a slow and cautious adoption of new media, which I think Heidi and Gavin before us have already detailed well, as well as Rosemary Avents. So examples that buck this 2-century trend, thus proving the rule. Here's a couple silly moments in the church's conservative relationship to media that you see kind of by accident. So once KSL, a church-owned television channel, once ran cigarette advertisements because its CBS conglomerate required it to, but for the most part it doesn't. Another time, church headquarters whispered to itself about the I word in the 1990s, which was the internet. And of course, from the pulpit, we've seen shifting internet discourse, rooting from a kind of pornography panics to its affordances for family history, to now, much more quietly, by the way, the fact that much missionary work happens through social media. Also an interesting moment, again, just to suggest that the church is kind of deliberately slow to adopt the new medium, is when a local bishop once had to buy the website mormon.org in the 90s because a porn squatter had owned it, and nobody at church headquarters had bothered to notice. So my geometric analogy here is Lobachevskian parabolic geometry. So XY coordinates, but they curve inward, right? Where all lines eventually meet, the coordinates curve around an origin unit. It might be the middle class 20th century family. It might be the church itself. In other words, the correlated church's media environments is an institutionally defensive structure, a circling of wagons. Media theology, progressive. And the Lord doth work by means. And that gospel work has an ultimately kind of progressive public impulse to bring about life for all through global missionary work, through global temple work, meant to creatively reinvent and rework the entire human family into a voluntary and transformative community. A progressive imagination of media environments also drives any imagined Zion at ease in a globally pluralist world. Mormon theology thus is full of interestingly progressive Pratt moments in the Pratt sense of medium, this environment. So remember that the first vision is enveloped in the medium of darkness and then light. We'll note that Sam Brown calls with sobriety the wild facts and artifacts of early Mormondom, seer stones, golden plates, divining rods, the Deseret alphabet, but also the holy media environments created by designed city plans, consecrated oil, garments, homes, and temples. Think about the spaces that those hold. Think about proxy work in the temple, where one person stands in for another, prefiguring a sort of accounting technique, a proxy index, a soteriology of the atonement. D&C 128's an extraordinary document in which the prophet Smith is receiving revelation while on the lam, running from the police, hiding in an attic. He receives a transcendent library temple theology, where books of life on earth instantly connect to and govern the books in heaven, not the other way around, where even the gaps in our records here reproduce themselves there, which I think is both fascinating and slightly terrifying. Shows how seriously we take record keeping in this theology. Every week in sacrament, think about the ways that media might be played out in this environmental sense. Every deacon becomes a medium for delivering bread and water, embodying Christ, himself a medium between partaker and heavenly parents. These media environments kind of proliferate. No media theorist has yet to clarify whether the deacon is a medium for Christ, the bread and water, are media for Christ, or the parishioners are media for Christ in taking his name for the obvious reason that there's a progressive surplus of media environments in our most holy of moments. In so many other ways, Mormon theology propounds a progressive phenomenology of nested media relations that ladder together heaven, earth, and the thick connections between. So my geometry analogy here is Lobachevskian hyperbolic geometry, right, where coordinates bend outwards into an imagined totality, an infinite communalism where lines never meet. Okay, next, Media innovation. So how do conservative institutions and progressive theologies interact? Unsurprisingly, with perpetual friction and occasional innovations. That's our institutionally liberal lot. So this pendulum swings back and forth across the arc of this movement from its 19th century radicalism to the 20th century, often white conservative Americana, to its now fiscally stable globalizing church in the early 21st century. The church avoids, adopts, adapts, mass produces, and mainstreams media until their channels become environments in which the channel users themselves become used by those media environments. And then sometimes users innovate change. This negotiation is uneven, it's ongoing, it's hard to summarize, and it's normal, particularly across larger traditions of media history, as we've seen in the literature. So here are a few Mormonish media innovations. In print, the bold publishing of the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants shortly after the printing press arrives in upstate New York. Helmut Hübner's anti-Nazi pamphleteering, the professionalization of church history archives, of course, the building of the Granite Mountain vaults, although that's more microfiche, and the development of Mormon literature in a literary cultural sense. Let's think about video for a second. Philo Farnsworth's invention of the all-electronic television and later early computer graphics at the University of Utah. In audio, Harvey Fletcher's hearing aid and audiometer, acoustic developments around the tabernacle and choir cultures, and digital sound recording developed by Thomas Stockham, Ingebretson, and Warnock. In digital media, Utah serves as one of the first 4 ARPANET nodes, the predecessor to the internet, in 1969. The digitalization of family history archives are pretty significant globally, and now, of course, Silicon Slopes rise, which features, among other moments, Frank H. McCourt's LDS-staffed so-called People's Bid for TikTok. These are just a few of 2 centuries of media innovations, and I'm sure this room could add many others. So I think no geometry metaphor can hold all of these. It assumes a kind of spatial reality that I don't think holds. Parabola and hyperbola certainly do not even square out into some Cartesian centrism. I think that's a foolish myth. If I had to force some kind of geometry analogy or way of conceptualizing spatially what Mormon media innovations mean, it's like the rest of the scrum of the world. Imagine if you want to take AI as our governing metaphor for the moment, the n-dimensional probability models behind ChatGPT or LLM. Imagine like complex vector fields that project, approximate, and make up models of reality, but reality itself still remains hidden. In short, what I'm saying is we're hallucinating if we think we know what comes next. That might, in fact, be a declaration particularly fit for Holy Saturday, a moment of deep uncertainty for Christ's followers, and maybe one of the first latter days. In conclusion, I'm interested in highlighting how Mormon's mediated nature offers a lens for understanding broader modern religious movements. Any religion, if it is to remain a religion in public, must engage across all 3. Conservative institutions, progressive theologies, and kind of liberal negotiations and innovations. Let's remember that at the same time that Heidegger was preoccupied with the sacramental chalice as a way of making sense of the nuclear age in his famous 1948 essay on technology, it was the same time that here in LA, megachurches were transforming parking lots outfitted with speakers and screens into drive-in worship environments. Can you imagine a drive-in church? The goal is not to lean towards Heidegger, whose conservatism openly serves evil, nor is it to give into the transhumanist reveries of transcendence through technology that paper over the cheapening of worship and drive through convenience. The goal is to build better media environments for all people. And thus the analytic value of a media Mormonism lies in how unpeculiar our experiences are. In them, we see Mormonism as a medium for modern media. Religious movements survive, here I'm closing up, by innovating and sustaining their communities. Our goal should be to build better media environments. In a decade in which white Christian nationalism has entered the national fray with fists up, us thinking and believing Mormons and others must resist our cultural complicity against that opponent, which sometimes is us. Reclaiming our 19th century non-white otherness might help us get some analytic distance, as might squaring with our non-Christianness to creedal Christians. but similarities can help bridge difference too. Mormonism is a relatively small, Americanist, global media religion. Mormons do and may continue to help resist a fractioning world by modeling in public, with service, how we can address our own internal challenges, both by and in addition to opposing the creeping trends of populist reaction, ethno-nationalism, and the rich get richer capital accumulation that we see defining the present day moment. Not just here in America, but worldwide. By recognizing media as environments, any small pluralist media religion uses its media not only to impress others, but to encounter our own reflections more clearly in our relations with others. There's no option not in the current environment. There's no Benedictine option in a digital age. It's already happening. Addressing challenges with openness and courage in public, while not without costs, will sustain not only a more just media Mormonism, but a better world. Thank you.
Hi, great to be here. Tough acts to follow. I am not coming from the academic world, and I am very new to the nonprofit world. I'm here to help contribute to today's interesting conversation around how is modern media changing religion. And the work I've been doing is looking more at how media today, both news and entertainment, impact and influence the way what we believe to be true about religion, and how we as people of religion feel like we're being portrayed and how others are being portrayed. So I am Brooke Zaugg. I am the executive director of the Faith in Media Initiative, which was started by, originally, it has multiple funders, but the original funder came from Deseret Management Corporation, which is a subsidy of the LDS Church, which happens to own many media companies. And they were interested and concerned about the way Mormons, as well as Catholics and Jews and Muslims, as well as any other religions, are being portrayed in society. So they've put in some seed capital several years ago to begin a nonprofit that is dedicated to creating more accurate, nuanced portrayals of faith. And we use the word faith broadly to kind of represent the whole kind of spectrum of what belief can mean to somebody, because religion can mean many things. There's lots of baggage, good and bad, that come with those words. So we've used the word faith. And the way that we've been tackling this is thinking about how we can build a rich collaborative relationship between two groups, faith groups and media groups, and that they know and better understand each other, to engage with each other better, so that the way that media represents us is more thoughtful and more meaningful and reflective of diverse lived experiences. One of the things that we've talked a lot about in my work is that religion today often feels like it's a taboo topic, or if we bring it up, there's a lot that comes with that of what people perceive to be true, or that we are all kinds of things that maybe we're not. Media, having a significant impact on culture, has played a major role in this kind of cultural sentiment that this is an uncomfortable, taboo topic. We've done a lot of research since I began my work there. I took very much a business approach to how can we know and understand what the market is and why. So we did a major study at the intersection of faith and news. 18 countries, nearly 10,000 people, trying to understand what are the attitudes and perceptions of people about the way they feel they are portrayed in media. I'm going to share a couple of data points. 53% believe that media actively ignores religion as an aspect of society and culture. 43% believe today's coverage creates great unease and anxiety, and that number increases significantly when you are coming from a highly secular country. 61% say the media perpetuates religious stereotypes, and 78% said they believe religious stereotypes should get as much attention as race and gender. In a second study we did this last year, it was at the intersection of faith and entertainment. So we looked at news, now we're looking at entertainment. Equally large sample size of nearly 10,000 people, this time in the 11 top entertainment consumer markets. And in that population, 80% said that the entertainment industry needed to improve its portrayal of faith. Religion has been politicized and weaponized for different political agendas. People and stories are often reduced to sensational headlines, stereotypes, and one-note storylines. Oftentimes, these narratives are harmful to society by increasing misunderstanding, growing division, polarization. A lot of things that we talk about with the elections and everything that are going on in this country is how can we reduce division and polarization. And one of those things that we believe it to be true is that if media more thoughtfully reflected the diversity of faith and what that actually means versus what we typically hear today. We want to improve as an organization faith's portrayal to be more accurate, nuanced, and reflective of lived experiences. It's difficult to represent or act on behalf of a particular religious institution. That's the job of the LDS Church or the Catholic Church or different Jewish denominations. But if we can help media understand or reflect nuanced lived experiences, we think that that can make a significant improvement. The reason we want this, our big why did the LDS Church start with the seed funding, why have others joined, is that we want faith to be brought back to the public square. We want religion to be something that is equally as acceptable and appropriate to speak about as all the other things we talk about in society today. And we also want it for those who are seekers, for those who are looking for meaning and purpose in their life, that what they see in the media is an expanded reflection of what they see, so that they might be more open to a God-centered life or finding purpose and meaning through God by seeing it reflected differently and better in media today. There's a couple ways that we as a nonprofit are doing this. One, we are trying to work very closely with media organizations to make a business case. These companies need to pay their bills, their businesses. We want them to know and understand. I've had many conversations with people at Time and Forbes and very prestigious magazines and newspapers and studios. And in the beginning this is a niche topic. And we've gone on to tell them that this is not a niche topic. The research that we did that was representative of a global sample size, 82% said, I identify as religious, spiritual, or a person of faith. We've tried to bring that forward to the media organizations for them to understand that this is indeed a large, underserved audience that cares deeply about this, and as they're looking for ways to engage with and connect with consumers, this is a way to do that. 63% of the people that we surveyed said that there's a need for high-quality content on faith and religion. 68% of global consumers said they would like more diverse perspectives of faith. And what they wanted was, and I've shared this a few times, when they said, what does more and better look like? It's more accurate, more balanced, more nuanced, and complex portrayals of how we live out our faith. We're also, in addition to trying to make a business case, also working to make a social case, that by doing this, there's an opportunity to bridge divides, increase understanding about who our neighbor is, what they believe, and what are our shared values. Some of the ways that we're going about this, we have been forming media partnerships with companies like Forbes and Variety, where they are actively creating on their own accord editorial content that's reflective of faith that's more nuanced that maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise. We are working to incentivize and recognize leadership in the media world. We are putting forward as a nonprofit awards, fellowships and awards similar to a MacArthur Award, where we are inviting newsrooms and writers to apply for grants to write more meaningful, nuanced stories that are reflective of faith. We've partnered with Variety Magazine. If you guys are anyone's from LA, or you know, they are the leader in the business of entertainment. This last year, for the first time, they did an impact list of the top 30 breakout storytellers, whether they were directors, actors, or writers, who meaningfully in 2024 showed faith in their mainstream content. We're not looking to advocate for religious movies like The Chosen. Those are all important and they serve a certain purpose. We're advocating for representation of faith and belief in mainstream content. We had a big awards ceremony where we had people like Jay Shetty and Viola Davis and a woman from a Navajo reservation who were receiving awards for their breakout portrayals of faith. Again, nobody cares if we say this, but if a Variety is saying this and if a Variety is recognizing the leadership within an entertainment industry, we believe that that's a great way to celebrate and elevate leadership and encourage more of that. We are also working to bridge the divide between faith communities and media companies. One of the major breakout points in all of the research that we've done when we're looking at solutions for change and better representation, the global population said in one of our studies, 84% of them said that people of faith and religious groups need to provide the media with spokespeople, particularly people with lived experiences. Newsrooms and studios alike have said they would welcome an opportunity to be more deeply connected and have access to resources of people who are willing and able to help them get those stories done better. So we are actually announcing later this year a new platform that is a database of experts, and you guys should be on this. I mean, what I've heard so far, people who are experts at the intersection of religion, faith, and media, or religion and faith and education, healthcare, so that when newsrooms or studios are developing those stories, they have access to meaningful experts. So to answer two of today's questions in summary, one of them was, how does the changing forms of media shape what we understand religion to be? We've validated through our research how critical media's portrayal of religion is. It shapes what we believe to be true about our neighbors and their beliefs, and also how we see our own faith reflected. Each form of media impacts how this topic shows up. We talked a little bit about influencers and newsrooms. Each plays a different role. Newsroom organizations, we've learned, are underpaid, overworked. There's no longer specialists, they're generalists, and they're just doing their best to get a story right. They've said and they lack staffing that reflects the population they serve. So again, we're trying to provide them resources and access to people who are willing to engage. Social media is out of our hands because it's influencers who are shaping the narrative, for good or bad, of what we believe to be true about faith. Entertainment is deeply committed to diverse portrayals of people around the world, and they've been extremely open and engaged and interested in knowing how they can more meaningfully reflect stories that are true to who we are and what we believe. The second question is, how are contemporary religious organizations grappling with or failing to grapple with the transformations in social media? And while I'm not leading a religious organization, one of the things that I've seen acutely is that oftentimes there's a couple of things. There's tremendous fear from religious leaders in local communities to speak on behalf of their congregation. Oftentimes when they do engage with newsrooms, it doesn't end up coming out the way that they had hoped, or it comes off in a sensational and negative way. So we as people of faith typically shy away from those engagements when it's critical that we actually, as best as we can, participate in those conversations and help them know and understand what is true and what is not. So fear is an issue, fear of engaging, training. We've been working a lot thinking about how can we train faith leaders to be comfortable, to meet media where they are and engage with them in a way that's helpful and in service of their business objectives as either a journalist or a writer for a film. Another thing that we've thought a lot about is thinking about how people speak on behalf of faith. Are they speaking on behalf of as an institution, on behalf of the LDS Church, or are they speaking on behalf of themselves? And I think figuring out how people navigate the nuances of those as they engage with media. And I think the last one I wanted to share is accountability. Most faiths believe that it is our job and duty to turn the other cheek, which is a very good value. But I think when media gets it wrong, it is also our responsibility in a respectful and meaningful way to engage with and help them understand how they can do it better or get it right next time, so that they continue to improve and not see us as an enemy, but a friend to the work and the stories that they're trying to tell. So I would just ask for all of us, and in asking these questions, can we speak up? Can we find ways to serve and train faith leaders in our communities who are speaking on behalf of the people they serve in their local media and also broadly in national and international media? And can we celebrate success? If we see newsrooms or studios that do this well, can we recognize them? Can we let them know what we like? Can we share that and engage so that they're encouraged to continue to do more? So those are kind of my key talking points for what faith and media is. I'm grateful to be here on this important conversation, and I believe that accurate portrayals of faith is a tremendous part in how we navigate religion in the future. So thanks.
Ben, Heidi, can we turn the microphones on? Okay, excellent. This is exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping to have. There was a switch right on top of it, Ben. There you go. Yep, perfect. Okay.
Maybe it is me.
Yeah. Here is the media expert.
Right.
I want to have a brief conversation about some of the things that you all brought up, and then we will throw it open to there. But first, actually, I thought it might be interesting to start that I'm interested in how the two academics here respond to what Brooke's organization is doing.
Yeah.
That is, do you have any thoughts, ideas, or maybe free advice?
No. Do you want to go first?
I thought, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that basically a lot of the strategies you're doing is the same thing that the Catholic Church has been doing for the last 50 years. So I think that, the strategy of kind of instead of just tell them what they're doing wrong, let's tell them what they're doing right, to reward and to recognize. The Catholic Church has a number of film festivals around the world where they regularly recognize, people that are doing that kind of, especially in that kind of industry. I think also is, a little bit touching actually on what Ben said, that there's a need for kind of, religious communities to develop a better kind of theology of media or theology of communication, and then to say, okay, if this is our values, this is what we're trying to espouse, how can, again,
Communicate that.
how do we speak into those spaces? So that's the two things I heard.
Here, I'll go like this. Is that better? So, Brooke, I thought it was wonderful. I don't know that I would have any deep professional advice. I think, again, reflecting on what Heidi was saying, the one thing that strikes me as a potentially useful way of approaching any media representation is to recognize and seek difference. To recognize that as an everyday person being interviewed by a journalist, I am not obliged to represent the church. I'm not the church spokesperson. In fact, the best position I can do is to look for difference, because there's almost always going to be some kind of disappointment. Ruth Palmer's excellent book, which I recommend broadly, surveys how everyday people interacting with journalism end up feeling about their portrayal, and it's almost always with some sense of difference. Not necessarily good or bad, but just like it doesn't quite fit. And again, I mean, I think practically, if we want to make that different, we might recognize that the news media industry has been bled by an internet-free news economy for 30 years, and staffs of 60 with fact checkers are now staffs of 3 with AI. And so, if you're not getting things right, it's not because the person is malintentioned.
Yep, there's
It's
no malice.
there's just tremendous need. It's like blaming the second grade teacher, and you realize they make $15,000 a year, right? So there are ways to address that fundamentally that are not blaming, and I think you've really articulated that beautifully. The second is, I think, to welcome and look for difference, and that's going to be part of the story, is that any LDS representation is much broader than I think usually anticipated, right? We all don't look alike. We're all in different countries and climes and continents, and my position is different than yours, and hallelujah. So I think those are my quick thoughts. I love it, though. Keep it up.
Thank you. I would also just add that this is something that we're doing to be we have a coalition of over 100 individuals and organizations that are not LDS. We have people from Paramount and Netflix and Amazon and Princeton. So our goal is to be reflective of or come on behalf of faith broadly, not one particular religion. And so I appreciate everything you guys have said.
Great. I want to talk a bit more theoretically now about all of this. Oh, you say, ooh. One thing that really has struck me, especially about your two presentations, is about the role of media in creating faith communities. In a sense, right, it is after the revolution of printing and the printing press that you see both Protestant churches and Roman Catholicism develop ideas of orthodoxy. We can now print out what the creed is and give it to all of you, so you all should understand and belong to what this is. So there is, in some sense, both a narrowing, but then also, as printing becomes increasingly popular, right, a kind of flowering of diversity that print media creates. And in some ways, I think the first of those, the kind of sense of media as a vehicle for creating a singular, univocal identity, the pinnacle of that, right, is maybe in post-war America. And it goes hand in hand with this period in post-war America where religious institutions become their most powerful. Right? It is sometimes a shock to the undergraduate students I used to teach to hear that membership in Protestant and Roman Catholic denominations at the time of the American Revolution is very low. It's below 20% in the United States. That skyrockets to nearly 75% right after World War II, and that has everything to do with how powerful and strong these institutions are. How good they are at like training ministers to send out and found new congregations, right? How powerful they are in disseminating, we brought up earlier, the Methodist Book Concern, right? Which is the first great media engine of the United States that promotes Methodism. So I am curious, right, as media has changed so rapidly over the last 20 or 30 or so years, what new ways of imagining what religious communities are we seeing? And I think, Brooke, you're talking about this, I think quite directly by talking about the kind of coalition of different groups, right? Different religious groups who 500 years ago might have been at each other's necks in early modern Europe, right, are now kind of allied and see themselves as sort of sharing this common sense of mission, right, and sense of purpose. Both of you have kind of alluded to these sorts of things too. So I wonder, what new religious communities are there now because of new media?
That's probably you.
I think one of the issues is that, it's the difference between like official religion and lived religion. So, in the mass media era of television, film, newspapers, it was kind of religious leaders. You had to have a lot of money to have access to the media and use it to present your community. And so they were very thoughtful, not just in kind of what content they put out there, but like kind of the theology, the kind of, what kind of image they were trying to create. Now we live in a culture, where people live their religion, and even if they're Mormon or they're Baptist or Hindu, they may not espouse or live out all the things. They have their own interpretation about what that looks like. And so when people say, hey, I am a Mormon, I am a Methodist, that definition is going to probably different from the official religious leaders. And that's, I think, where the rub is. It's that oftentimes individuals, and like we can see this with these influencers, they're creating a story, they're creating a brand, but they might not be intentional about what that religious identity is and does it align with their personal beliefs or with their community. And so I think, what it means to be religious, what it means to be a certain part of a certain community or tradition is changing, because it used to be it was this one brand, and now there's about a dozen brands within that one brand. Mm-hmm. I think that's why we can the whole issue of is Christian nationalism in the U.S. and the kind of a rise of wanting to put out this anti-Christian kind of watch, and it's like, well, what form of Christianity are we thinking is not being represented? So it's again the representations, and so I think we could talk about how digital media is causing people to create new religions, and there are examples of that, but it's more that I think we're seeing the diversity, and because it's not governed by one people or one particular kind of gatekeeper, that's we're seeing the true complexity of the community, but that it's in a way that was not possible before, but that then causes tension within the community itself.
Yeah. Beautiful, thank you. I mean, I would just reply, what new religious communities or new media creating? It's ours. Right? Like, I think, as Heidi has rightly suggested, we're able to see ourselves anew and see new complexity, new plurality, new difference. And frankly, if we're doing this well, this is a continuation of the tradition, not a collapse of it, not a threat to it, not a source for anxiety, but an opportunity, frankly, to take the darn restoration tools that any believing Mormon has been handed from the very beginning. Let's remember, this is a bad analogy, but you can find all sorts of different religious communities online. If I want, I could find Putin-esque, alt-right, Orthodox meme generators, right, where the people are revisiting orthodoxy from the 1500s as a way of justifying, right? But that's not necessary. I think the beginning of the restoration, as LDS people understand it, is God the Father telling a little young boy that his son's church is not here, right? And that is an opportunity for realizing that there's work to do. And that there's a space for creation, a space for rereading, a space for the continuation of the tools that then follow afterwards. Namely, within the very hierarchy and orthodoxy of the doctrine of print, is also its complement, which is reading well, right? So I think any proper restoration tradition has to learn to read well, and in the fact of reading, we find meaning, right? That's Joseph Smith biblical translation. That's every general conference opportunity. That's daily scripture study. These are acts of restorative reading. And if we can't read well, then we're in trouble. And so I think that's one of the challenges, is that ironically the print medium provides both the challenge and the tools for adapting to a world of seemingly collapsing difference where there's an orthodoxy, but also the opportunity to see difference and to maintain it and to not be afraid of it. So I worry about the declining areas, not just of new media literacy, but of literacy in general. I think a recent survey found that 56% of Americans have something like a 6th grade level of literacy. So, whatever the new media are, let's remember that in the larger sense of humanity, literacy is fairly new, right? 7 generations ago, our ancestors were probably in Northern Europe, and women were probably not taught to write, and they might put an X for their signature, and they might read, but a lot of a lot of things have happened in the last century and a half, and so I think we should taking a bigger restoration perspective on new media and our adoptions to it, we should recognize that literacy is part of this. Anyway, those are some early thoughts.
I'm leaving that one to them.
To that point, let's talk about books and literacy. And this is, right, the notion that religion is something really deeply aligned with literacy is deeply Protestant, right? That emerges out of the printing press, out of the Protestant Reformation, out of Luther's desire for people to read the Bible in the vernacular, right? And that is something I think the LDS Church inherited from Protestantism, this fixation on reading and text. And that generates a religion that has a certain caste, right? As you say, this certain kind of a sense of reading being really significant, engagement with text being really significant. In the LDS tradition, the notion that reading a text can actually kind of transform you spiritually, can convert you, can make you something new. To that end, though, I think it's sort of a cliche in media studies, right? The medium is the message, right? McLuhan. How does then social media make religion? How does social media transform the message of religion in the way that the printing press transformed Christianity?
Well, I mean, coming from what's called science technology studies, I would push against that and say that it's not the medium that makes the message; it's the people who created the medium and the cultural context. People will argue like, oh, look at the bias of AI. Well, it's based on the algorithm, and somebody programmed that algorithm. I know. Ben's kind of working on some of those ideas about how some of the assumptions that are built into kind of our digital culture were put in by programmers that maybe were religious, weren't religious, but they were struggling with different things, and their beliefs, their identity got put in there. And so, I would say that, these things that we're seeing coming out of digital media, it's coming out of the diversity as well as the brokenness of humanity. It's like, the stereotypes that we see, people have talked about for generations about different religious groups, they're just replicated in meme culture. There's some new things, but some nuances, but it's the same stereotypes. The biases that are constructed into, whether it's Google or into, ChatGPT are the same biases because that's what the programmers, put in, as far as like, oh, when you see this kind of face, you have this reaction and you associate these words. And so I think, in some ways, there's nothing new under the sun. It's just on hyperdrive. And you can do it much more quickly, and it has much more of a global impact in some ways.
Lovely. Yep.
I would just add, I think what you said earlier was true. It's just that it's expanding the diverse voices and expanding the brands where you hear, for good or bad, people are changing the way you perceive what it is to be Mormon, from mom talk to, all of the different things that you're seeing. I just think it's expanding what it can look like for good and bad, and it's up to the person, but that's also a reflection of their real lived experience. So that's really all I would add.
Yeah, not to bring up, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, but, I have watched quite a few episodes that, it's interesting that even within that, which there's a lot of narcissism and a lot of kind of brand management, but there's also a lot of authentic voices of women and husbands having conversations about, what it means to be a person of faith in the 21st century. And so, I think it's kind of like, it's a performance, but it's also, there is some thought.
It's exploration.
Yeah, it's exploration.
Yeah.
So there's the good and the bad.
Yeah.
I'll just add maybe briefly that in your point about, I'll be ultra Protestant then. In this case, I'm going to lean into literacy, but just say that already we're multi-literate, and we can recognize that. So I was just emphasizing kind of print literacy and scriptural interpretation, et cetera. But I think, as I tried to mention, like the work theologically that paperwork and bureaucracy does is operationally, functionally within the church is really meaningful. So we already have another way of thinking about the work that text does. And that's, I think, useful. And then more broadly, if you look at kind of the LDS experience, I think there's lots of forms of professional literacies. And we can recognize within social media a certain type of professional literacy. So in other words, I think it's a mistake to kind of like be worried about it, dismissive of it, because, and this is true, the large part of the long tail is just people posting random stuff without a lot of thoughtfulness. But we know, because of algorithms and because of the way the capital is accumulated and power and interest and likes and attention, that there's also a real professionalism and a work that has to go into media work. And so people who are doing social media well, we might want to dismiss them, pedestal them in weird ways. Oh, they're just mommy bloggers or something. No, there's extraordinary work that requires another type of literacy, a reading of audiences, a reading of schedules and operations and interests and keeping up with motion. And so I think there is a broader, more generous way of thinking about how literacy could really engine and power appropriate, critical difference, okay with difference approaches to our own representations.
Yeah, expertise. Excellent. All right. I'm going to throw this wide now to any of you who might have questions, and I will run this up and down. Reed, we'll start with you. Oh, okay. Would you mind handing that right behind you?
Professionally, I work for a congressional agency. I conduct performance audits, and one of the projects I worked on last year was the military's use of digital media to support recruitment efforts. One of the things that we found, or at least through some of the work that the Department of Defense conducted, was that increasingly news and any type of real content is found in social media, especially for Gen Z and younger millennials. So I'm kind of interested in kind of getting your take on my question here. So we made a recommendation that that the military focus more on outcome-oriented metrics to kind of gauge how the messages or the content that they create to try to get target audiences interested in perhaps military service. I gauge how effective that those messages are being received. In terms of faith, and particularly with the LDS Church, in kind of the social media or digital media arena, is there much effort in trying to gauge how effective the content that the church puts out there, either centrally or say through their missionaries, which have maybe a little bit of a less direct control, but they're still control nonetheless. I'll be honest with you, 5 years ago as the pandemic began, I started seeing missionaries creating videos with faith-based content to Taylor Swift songs. That would be something back in the late 90s when I was on my mission. First, obviously, the technology didn't exist, but that wouldn't even fathom that's something that we would do. So does the church gauge how effective they are in both directly how they control what they produce and then indirectly through, say, the missionary force and how effective their messages are being received?
Great question. I certainly don't want to speak for the church while I work with them. I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but I will say, having worked with them for the last 3 years, they are extremely intentional and extremely thoughtful about where is the message going and who you're targeting. Social makes sense, and influencers, but they very, very thoughtfully and carefully track everything that is put out, what the metrics are, how people respond, who receives it, monitoring what missionaries do. They're very, very mindful of that. So that's the most I would be able to say of what they do, because I can't speak on their behalf. But
can I just add a question here? In the 60s, we had all the British baptisms in the UK by missionaries baptizing kids without their parents knowing to grow the church. So T. Bowering Woodbury and his wife Bubbles, as mission presidents, could get a lot of credibility with the brethren. I'm just wondering, do you or anyone know how many Taylor Swift baptisms we've now had in the church? Salt Lake knows. I thought you might.
they're great keepers. We're great keepers of data. That's all I know.
I expected you would know.
Do you want to?
I don't have it.
I'm not going to speak for
I don't have
you,
the
John.
system.
I thought I'd make one observation and then ask a provocative question. So the one observation is that it was, to me, it was a kind of watershed moment when Emily Bell Freeman was called to be Young Women's president for the church, because she was a vlogger before she was Young Women's president. And she was powerful in driving interest in the church, and I would say that she built a community, and then I'm a Latter-day Saint, so I believe there was inspiration and everything involved. But then the church co-opted that community by calling her, and then leveraged her to greater heights. Anyway, I thought that was a big moment in the digital life of the church, I would say. But the question I have is, I hear, and Brooke, great to see you. I hear that we need to educate more, and there's we need to bring people up the learning curve so they can accurately represent, which I think is true in some cases, but I also think that there is, in some instances, malice. That it's like, I see your values, I have different values, I'm going to take down your values. And I was just wondering if, on balance, well, first of all, do you agree with that? And secondly, how much of this can be solved through education, and how much of it is actually a true war of values? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've definitely seen through our work, and I won't name names, in the first round of research we did at Intersection of Faith and News, we did 30 in-depth interviews with top senior executives and editors in newsrooms. And many of them actually were people of faith, but felt like it was unsafe for them to openly speak about that in the newsroom because they were very uncomfortable, or that was an area that was not discussed or acceptable. And then there's also, we've talked a lot about the largest, most influential news organizations and entertainment industry are on the two coasts, which are reflective of more of values that are not as typically aligned with a broader kind of, I'll say, American heartland, if I'm talking about American media. There is definitely a war of values and of ideologies. The people who are running a lot of the newsrooms are not aligned, but what I have learned in this work is in the ranks, there are many, many, many people who are aligned and don't. This is their job, and like in studios, there are women and men who've come up to me who've said, I've had to make movies that I don't reflect what I care about, but that's what the studio has bought. So I've found that there are a lot of really good people in systems that aren't very equipped or open to. There are some that are definitely against the values of what we stand for, but I would say more broadly, in newsrooms, Mike Allen, when we launched, he's the founder of Axios. When we launched our first set of research, he joined us at Concordia to talk about this, and he said, we shy away from religion because it's complicated. It's very complicated, and we are afraid of it. But he said, but we cover sexuality, we cover war, we cover economics. These are all complex topics that we need to be brave and bold enough and faith fluent in terms of being trained to know how to meaningfully do this, because there is a real fear of getting it wrong. For people who are religious, it is easy to be offended. I've worked with Angel Studios that have done movies. A devout Catholic who did Cabrini, he put in $50 million of his own money to talk about a patron saint that he loved. And it was a labor of love. And the people that were the most critical of it were the Catholics, because it was so personal for them of how they felt. So what I've learned is this is a very hard topic to cover, that if we can train people of faith, particularly faith leaders, to be better equipped to understand how to engage media, and if we can help media understand that this is important and worthy of their effort and give them access to people who are willing to help them, that we can move the dial as much as we can. But then there is, like you said, there is a piece of this that no matter what, there is some resistance. But the work we've done, one of the partnerships we've done, in the very beginning, it was, and I'll talk about this, was a great partnership actually with Variety. In the beginning, they said, this is very niche, we don't know. And we worked with them and we worked with them. And when we did the list, we said, the impact list that their editorial team chose, we said we want it to be mainstream content and we want it to be reflective of diverse religions, diverse faith. They said, yeah, we got it. What it ended up being was overtly Christian, not diverse, and not mainstream content. It took a lot of hard conversations over a year to help them start to understand, and it wasn't until we were at the award ceremony when their editors, their CMO, their CEO sat and saw the spectrum of people and saw the stories, and they said, oh, we get it. So there's a lot of learning, more learning than malice. I really do believe that to be true.
Beautiful. Go ahead.
I just want to add that, we are also in kind of a bit of a shifting moment. In my book, Digital Religion, The Basics, I talk about the kind of traits about how people define religious community, identity, authority, and they've all changed. And we often say, oh, it's the internet that did the change. No, these are broader cultural shifts, but they've just kind of come to the fore and gotten spotlighted because of the internet. So one of the issues is, like, how do young people define truth compared to my generation? It was rationality, it was knowledge that then was gone into, to information. But for young people, truth is not as validated for them by experience, their personal experience and the experience of their peers. So if their peers say that's not true, even if there is documentation, they're going to question it. And what is authentic is also the authenticity is judged by the presentation, not just the facts. And so this is again a different. And so one of the challenges, especially for faith communities, is that we define facts in this way, and young people are defining facts in a different way. And we can blame it on the boomers. The boomers were the 60s generation. They were questioning authority, who taught Generation X, who taught our kids, who now are Generation Z, who basically, we can't trust anything that an authoritative voice comes from. So of course they're not going to trust. If it echoes my experience and the experience of my peers, I'm going to trust it. And so again, it's what we're seeing is that a lot of these kind of stretch points are because there are some kind of shifts in how these younger generations are defining what's real, defining what needs to be community, how they live their spiritual lives, and it's just not congruent with the definitions of the generation before them. And so there needs to be kind of a learning and a collaboration between those generations, not saying you're wrong, you're wrong. It's just two different historical moments, and there has to be some interconnecting between them.
So your comment about, let's see, how did you say it? They must read restorative theology. They have to read well. And so what is your concept of banning books? Is there a place for it over the decades, and especially the last 3 months?
Is that
This
me?
is you, your literacy. This is you.
I'm against banning books. I think anything that you can trace with direct historical analogy to the Third Reich and other things should generally be avoided. I don't know. I think, a Bible, we already have a Bible, is already a sufficient response, right? I think, by the way, read, and just generally, the relationship that you guys were just describing between the faithful person trying to represent their faith to the media that feels like malice and misunderstanding, I just want to be totally candid, and this may be slightly too confessional. I'm not a Trump supporter. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's my experience in Sunday school. So the experience that you're describing, between media and public, is my relationship with the people I love and break bread with. And so I feel like for me, what reading well means is not super literacy. It's tolerance of difference and understanding people who are different, while also welcoming that. And so I can't understand any context in which you would ban books. I really don't. Maybe there's, I don't know, how to build a bomb might not be a good idea for most public libraries, but anything that is just fit within the normal liberal tradition. If it doesn't cause harm, then learn from it. Yeah.
What is your Christmas wish list, Brooke, or Heidi? If you were to say, this is what I'm going for, I guess both of you guys can answer that.
Go for it. There you go.
Because you have both different, Easter wishes.
The long-term Christmas wish for me, and the reason that I said yes to taking this job, was to make it acceptable and permissible to meaningfully, openly talk about faith, to not feel afraid, and to feel like when I watch a movie, I'm not Catholic, I am so tired, and I understand bad things have happened in all religions. I am so tired of seeing the perverted Catholic priest causing harm in every single show that I watch. So for me, success is, I'll give an example. Res Ball was a show that came up on Netflix. I didn't know anything about it. It was Navajo. It was basketball. A young man had died, and it beautifully showed how their traditions helped them navigate the loss and death of a young boy. So for me, it is narratives that meaningfully show how we navigate faith in our everyday lives, and that this is not something that I feel afraid to talk about. And I've learned, I'm going to give one example. I was at an event with Forbes. It was in Abu Dhabi with their women 50 over 50 and 30 under 30. It was their women's summit. So women who were changing the world. And I had my little faith in media name tag on, and they're like, what are you here for? I'm like, I'm here for God. I kind of made a joke of like, I'm here to try to improve the way faith is portrayed. Because I said that first, the conversations that I had with these women were totally different. It wasn't about what they built, but why. And because they immediately went into their story, their faith tradition, why it was so important, or why it was crappy at that moment. But it was a meaningful way to connect, and I learned that they were willing to say it because I said it first. And if my Christmas wish would be at the end would be that this is something that we can openly, meaningfully talk about without being afraid.
I guess, my Christmas wish list, or what kind of drives me is, I think Reed might have said it earlier, Micah 3:5, what does the Lord require of us? To do justly, love mercy, and walk in humility. And, if my current Christmas list is if people in the U.S., especially people of faith, actually lived that out in a serious and reflective way. One of the words for mercy is kindness. And so if any of you this morning picked up, I had put out there, there were some little stress balls and little kind of meditation things, yes. And that's, my way of spreading kindness is, the academic can be an unkind place, so I'm going to try to spread kindness. Where there's injustice, I'm going to call it when it comes into my sphere of influence. And to walk in humility, to just bring, it's sad to be in a generation where it's an embarrassment to call oneself a person of faith because of what faith has become, or what Christianity has become defined as in this country. And so I just want to be one person that you can say at least I'm authentic in what I believe.
So my question is essentially, how do you navigate interfaith and media, or just faith and media, when it comes to doctrinal differences that butt up against the use of media and reaching a wider audience?
Is that for me? Oh, I'll just say for me, when I started this work, we had to make a conscious decision that our goal wasn't to try to make sure, I know from an interfaith perspective of like who agrees with what, but for us it's just how can we bring a coalition of people who were locking arms as people of faith who feel like we are greatly misrepresented. I am not an expert on Sikhism or on particular practice of being Muslim, but can we collectively make media aware of there's a large group of people that feel misrepresented. We are here and interested in helping you get it right, and allow individuals to contribute to what that looks like and the way it actually comes out in society.
I do a lot of both consulting work and research work with a lot of different communities. I work with the Vatican. I work with Muslim seminaries. I work with evangelical Christians, and I work with mainline denominations. And I tell all of them a couple of the same things. One is that we live in a world where you can't avoid media. It's even if you opt out of it, you are going to be reflected in it. And so isn't it better to kind of understand it and then make wise choices about it, and then teach the generations and just teach your community of how to use it. And so I think that's kind of one of my main things is like, okay, what, and I use the religious social shaping and technology. I go, let's find out what your background is, let's find out what your values are, and then how can you use media to leverage and build those things. And I think that, is the core of, what most religious communities are doing. They want to get their message out, whether it's a true representation of who they are or to kind of, in more of a kind of evangelistic kind of spreading their community. And so if you can get to that point, then you can have a lot of common conversations.
No, we haven't talked about media profit and faith based. So, what is your experience in terms of research? So Angel Studios has been, I guess, successful. Has it led the mainstream studios to emulate in any way? So, how does the success or non-success of faith affirmative media presentations play into the decision makers? I'm assuming they're all concerned about the bottom line, but I wonder about that.
It's a slow road, but it's working. I don't know if you guys have watched House of David. I've had lots of conversations with Amazon Studios. They've invested $250 million into the series House of David. They're putting major backing behind content that is faith affirming or reflective of faith. It is the #1 series on Amazon right now. Studios I'm very good friends with Angel guys. They're amazing with their investors. All the studios are coming to them and saying, what are you doing? Scratching their heads like, what are you doing? So there is when you do look at what's put out there, a lot of it is dark and disturbing or misaligned with kind of the things that we would espouse as valuable stories. But they are taking note of their model. They are taking note of how quickly that guild is growing, because it's basically demonstrating, again, an audience of consumers that are not getting the content they want from mainstream Hollywood, and they're willing to pay. I think King of Kings, which is overtly religious, which is put out through Angel Studios, is the highest pre-sales commercial biblical story over any that has come out historically in animation. So they are watching, they are taking note, and I think what Angel's trying to do is also find that fine line of like values-based religious stuff and just good values that audience wants. But they are taking note, and the research that we did around the large underserved audience and the conversations I've had with Amazon, they said, your research has come across my desk many, many times by content creators who are working to make a case for why they should care about my stories. He also said, the gentleman that I spoke with, he said, my music guys, what they wish they could be doing is rap and R&B, but guess what they're doing? Country. Why? Because that's what the numbers say the market wants. He said the same is true for House of David. That's why we made a significant contribution to that. There's another group called Wonder Project that did House of David. They're doing Young Washington, about George Washington as a young boy and his values that made him great. So they are noticing Hollywood just takes a much longer, like movies take years to make, and so it will take longer for us to see change. But they are taking note, for sure, of what Angel's doing.
And I think it's really important that, we oftentimes in faith communities, we think of media as, this is about sharing a message. Media is a commercial entity.
Right.
It's about making money, whether it's paying the bills, or keeping the lights on. And so it's, I think framing it, a religious community as a viable market and as an important market is the best strategy. And there's quite a few examples in our media studies of, religious groups that have kind of been able to frame that to different groups, like the birth of the kosher cell phone in Israel in 2007. It was because 3 rabbis who didn't talk to each other decided to talk to each other, hire a lawyer, and basically lobby Motorola to develop a special cell phone for them, because they could sell, our community will all buy this phone if you make it that doesn't turn on during the Sabbath, it doesn't have access to the internet, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's plenty of these examples across time. It's learning for religious communities to be kind of understand why the media exists,
How it works.
and then using their language to kind of argue for their content they want. Yeah.
I'll just simply note that I hope that we don't mistake means for ends. I initially thought you meant media profit, like the guy on the wall, and I actually think that's how I think I would organize these really thoughtful comments. Is that for me, like, what is the profit serving? If it's capital accumulation, you may not be after what you think you're after, right? If your goal rather is to be sustainable and to create a service and create a product and a community that has meaning and that responds to that community, that is aware of the dynamic of that community, then you're doing good in the world, right? And then I think you're serving a global gospel good. I think you should be wary of, as I think any kind of good tradition would be, mistaking the end for the means and imagining that profit is sufficient to justify the creation of a product. Because I mean that is ultimately what has, in large part, made media such a terrible place to exist online, right? Like I mean, if we follow pornographers, if we follow, just kind of spam, if we follow the many ways that media prioritize profit because there's no other ways to create it, we're becoming the monsters that we're trying to avoid. So I hope that there's a profit before a profit is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. But when we're also trying to convince Netflix, who has bills and people and their bottom line Wall Street traded companies, what we're trying to say is great social good and affects your bottom line if you do this meaningfully. If you don't do this in a way that is crude or offensive but is thoughtful in mainstream everyday content, there's tremendous bottom line value on top of great social good that can come. So that's been the message we've been taking to all the studios and newsrooms.
Let's thank our panel. We're almost there. You've got one more 30-minute break, and then at 5 p.m., our plenary address.